Please welcome An Taoiseach Leo Varadkar TD, Ireland, and Bloomberg's Stephanie Flanders.
Taoiseach, thank you so much for joining us on the last day of this conference. We had a pretty nice dinner last night, but I think yours might have been even more star-studded. How was it?
It was fascinating. Sorry I wasn't here. I would have loved to be here with you for the dinner, but I believe Ms Donoghue did a good job at filling in for me. So it was in Hillsborough Castle near Belfast, which was a dinner hosted by Prime Minister Sunak to really thank the architects of the Good Friday Agreement. So Prime Minister Johnson was there, Prime Minister May, all the previous Secretaries of State, the Clintons, Senator Mitchell. So yeah, it was quite the
we were talking about the opportunities for selfies were really mind-boggling.
Well, thankfully not that many people wanted a selfie with me, so it wasn't the full onslaught.
You get to photobomb with some of the others.
People way above my pay grade there. So
you have spent. It must have seemed like quite a long commemoration of the Good Friday Agreement. It feels, it's been running for a while. I guess we're at the end now. 25th anniversary. Do you think the Windsor Framework will get a 25th anniversary?
I think it will, but it's not the same thing. The Good Friday Agreement ultimately brought peace to the island and allowed us, opened the door to a lot of investment and a lot of prosperity, particularly south of the border but north of the border as well, and opened the door to a lot of social progress, reversed decades of outward migration, for example. Windsor Framework is important, but it's a technical arrangement around trading and customs.
Of course, it's an outrageous comparison, I guess. But I guess the point is, does it effectively resolve the question marks around the post-Brexit relationship?
Yeah, I believe it does. It's now been agreed by the EU and the UK. Nobody's calling it for it to be reopened or renegotiated, not even the DUP. The issues that they raise are issues that are bilateral with the UK government. So I do think it gives us a settled, agreed trading arrangements and relationship for Northern Ireland. And now we need to work on getting institutions up and running, but that won't involve reopening the Windsor Framework. But what I would say, though, is that none of these things are necessarily the final word on the UK's trading relationship with the European Union. We do know in the next few months they're going to start their checks on imports from the EU. So that is going to affect us and affect anyone who trades with the UK.
It's always in a few months.
Yeah, well, they might put it off again, but sooner or later it's going to happen, and we have to, accept that reality. Brexit will never just be done. It will require constant negotiations, constant alterations to the relationship. The beautiful thing about the single market is you don't have to worry about any of that. You all have the same rules. The relationship with the UK, I think, is going to be a bit more like the relationship we have with Switzerland or other third countries, Norway, where agreements have to be amended and changed from time to time. But one thing I would still hope for, and it's not impossible in my view, is that in the future, a future British government, maybe not the next one, maybe not the one after that, will seek a closer relationship with the European Union again. That mightn't be rejoining. I think that's a remote prospect, but it might involve a revision of the TCA, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, to have a closer relationship, and that's something that the door will always be open to.
You mentioned the DUP. I will get on to other things, but the DUP leader, Jeffrey Donaldson, has had an onslaught from the last couple of weeks. Bill and Hillary, President Biden, everyone putting enormous pressure on them to resolve the crisis instalment. Do you think that's going to have a net positive or a net negative effect?
I hope it has a positive effect. That's certainly the intention. But I don't think the DUP will be browbeaten or bullied into doing anything. They will make their decisions based on, on what they think is right. Hopefully, what's right for Northern Ireland and Ireland, not just what's right, and the UK, not just what's right for them as a political party. And they have set up a group under Peter Robinson, Arlene Foster's on that, others that are advising them on what the next step forward should be. So there are local elections in May, but Prime Minister Sunak and I will be working towards a window after the local elections to try and get the institution stood up. Very keen to talk to all the 5 major parties about that. Let's not forget that there are 5 major parties in Northern Ireland. The DUP is important because it's the biggest party representing the unionist community, but not the only one, and has 20-something% of the vote, and we shouldn't forget that. And I do think that the new executive, if it's going to be set up, will need help from the 2 governments, political help, financial help, and we're up for that.
But all this international attention on the crisis and all of this pressure on the DUP, if that doesn't work, what is going to work?
Well, Plan A is the only plan that we have at the moment, and that is to stand up the institutions, the Executive, the Assembly, the North South Ministerial Council under the existing rules. I don't think direct rule from London is an option. Nobody wants that. Nobody thinks it would be viable. Certainly not for long. And nobody thinks that a new set of elections would necessarily change things. So, Plan A is the only plan at the moment.
All right, I want to talk to you a bit about Ireland. We've seen, and we talked a little bit this week about the tax revenues pouring into the coffers. For those of us who were here during the crisis years, which don't seem very long ago when the IMF were here, it seems like an extraordinary turnaround. How are you going to spend all those billions?
Well, first of all, we shouldn't forget why we have all those revenues. We have full employment, we have incomes that are much higher than the EU average or the world average, and we have successful companies, Irish and multinational companies, that have big operations here and pay a lot of tax, and that's why we'll have a substantial budget surplus this year, and probably will next year too. But I think any time we talk about the surplus, we shouldn't forget the debt. I've heard a lot of discussion in the last couple of days and couple of weeks about Ireland's budget surplus, maybe 6 billion this year, maybe 10 billion next year. We have a debt of 250 billion. And on a per capita basis, our debt is quite high. It's about 45,000 per person in the state. So, if you're running a household budget, it's great that you can set aside a few €100 a month if you can, but you don't ignore the fact that you have a debt of 250,000 euros over here too. We always need to bear that in mind. So, yes, we will reduce income taxes. Yes, there will be a welfare package in the budget to help people with the cost of living, particularly pensioners and people on social welfare. And yes, we will be able to invest more in capital and infrastructure, and so we should. But it's also important that we set aside some of that windfall gain and that we pay down the debt, because sooner or later it will come to pass that revenues fall. Might be 3 years, might be 6 years, might be 10, who knows. But I don't want a future government to be in the position that we were back in 2011 when my party came to office, and we'd no other choice but to raise taxes and cut spending and cut pay and reduce investment. We'd no other choice, and the IMF were in town, the Troika were in town. So what we're not building up is a rainy day fund. What we're building up is an anti-austerity fund, so that when that day comes, when revenues fall off, we won't have to cut pensions, we won't have to increase income taxes, we won't have to cut back on investment. And that's the way I'd like people to see it. In
terms of what you've considered to be the windfall this year, how much of that are you hoping to save, to put away? Because the comparison with household falls down a bit because the household doesn't have to get re-elected. There's not conversation in the household about a possible early election. Are you really going to be able to squirrel it all away?
Not all of it. So we'll make those decisions, obviously, at budget time in October, but we'll put some in reserve for future pension liabilities, for example, future healthcare costs. We've a growing ageing population. We will use some to increase investment in areas that we need more investment, like housing, for example, our hospitals, education, and there will also be a tax and welfare package in the budget. But we have put some aside already, by the way, the 6 billion set aside already in a strategic reserve fund, and we are going to see our debt, both in cash terms and as a percentage of GDP, fall over the next couple of years. And that is about insulating us for future shocks, because yes, the next election is important, and that is when the electorate will judge us, but future generations judge you too. And nobody's going to thank a government, in 6 years or 7 years or 10 years that could have prevented another boom bust cycle, that could have prevented that kind of pro-cyclical economics that leads to austerity. And I don't want that on my conscience in 10 years' time or 15 years' time.
When you said the next election is important, I almost thought you'd said imminent, and I thought that's
it's
great.
Not imminent.
We've got our story for the. But one thing, I mean, you talked about helping households, and you're going to have the tax cuts. The European Commission, as you know, has kind of put every country on notice that they want to see those subsidies, that's energy subsidies and support for households, phased out by next year. Have you thought about how you're going to do that? And which side of the election it might be?
Yeah, well, in terms of the help, and there's help in place for households and businesses with their energy costs, that does depend on energy prices. And we are seeing the price of petrol and diesel fuel fall, thankfully. And I would anticipate that we'll see the price of electricity and gas fall as well. But we're not going to withdraw those things too quickly. Because businesses do need help with their energy costs. Energy costs are high in Ireland relative to other countries for lots of reasons, and households continue to need that help as well. But I think one thing we have seen, inflation is slowing, but I don't see overall prices going down. I think what we've seen is a permanent shift upwards in the cost of things. Energy might come down, but overall prices are not going to come down to where they were. So when you see an overall increase in prices and the cost of living, it's not unreasonable for people to say that I should see an increase in what I'm paid, an increase in what my take-home pay is after tax. And that is something we can afford. And also what we'll focus on a lot in Ireland is bringing down the cost of some of the things that are very expensive in Ireland. So take childcare, for example. Very expensive in Ireland. It's a barrier to a lot of parents getting back into the workforce. We've cut childcare fees by 25% this year. We want to do more next year, and that has lots of benefits. And we cut the cost of public transport, for example, and that's resulted in an increase in people using buses and trains, and they're the kind of things we want to make permanent.
One of the big obstacles, I was listening even on the radio this morning, Good Morning Ireland, the obstacle to the solution to the childcare shortage in some ways is more people.
Yeah.
How are you going to be supporting that sector and other sectors who are really struggling to get people?
Well, everyone is struggling to get people. I come from a background in the health service, and we've had a recruitment and retention challenge in the health service for as long as I can remember, but now it's across the board. It's public sector, it's private sector, it's poorly paid jobs, it's well-paid jobs. Everyone is struggling with recruitment and retention, and that is because we have full employment. It's a much better problem than the opposite problem, which is unemployment. And I think we need to acknowledge that. So, just increasing salaries and improving terms and conditions won't necessarily solve the problem when you have full employment. So what we need is more people who are available to work. And that involves migration. We have a pretty liberal work permit regime in Ireland to bring in skilled people from overseas. It does mean activating and training up people who currently aren't in the workforce and helping them into the workforce. And that includes people from disadvantaged backgrounds, people with disabilities who would like to work but can't work for various reasons. And all of that really is in train. And that's kind of where things like childcare and equality in the workforce are important as well, because a lot of parents, particularly women, but not always women, leave the workforce earlier than they want to, find it hard to get back in, and aren't able to work the hours they'd like to work or get the promotional opportunities they want to work. And that's an area where we can change too. And one of the things we brought in is legislation now in the gender pay gap. So companies have to say what their pay gap is, explain it, and try and improve it. So I think all those things can bring more people into the labour market, and that will help.
Just going slightly more international, and also for this audience, the OECD International Tax Treaty, which obviously the Biden administration had quite a lot to do with, Ireland had been very concerned about being forced to raise its corporate tax rate, but that's now going to happen, go up from 12.5 to 15.
Only for companies with a turnover of 750 million or more. And that was important for us, that it would apply to large companies making substantial profits, not your SMEs.
But do you think that's going to make any difference at this point, given the fair wind you've got from tax revenues and from companies coming into Ireland? Are you actually worried about that now, the impact of that?
Well, as you know, the agreement has two elements. One is the minimum rate, which we've signed up to and will introduce from next year, and the other is the way the base is calculated and where taxes are booked, and that's the one that might have a greater impact on us, because companies may be booking revenues here in Ireland that under the new rules they might have to book elsewhere. So that's the area where we could see a reduction, and we're conscious of that.
When you're conscious of it, have you got any estimates of internal estimates on what kind of impact it might have?
Yeah, we do now. The most recent estimates we just put out there the other day show corporation profit tax receipts continuing to rise over the next couple of years, but we have a figure of about 10 to 12 billion a year in corporation profit tax receipts that we consider to be windfall or maybe windfall, and that's roughly about half of the corporation profit tax we receive. But it's very hard to project these things. You know, we've modernised and reformed our corporate tax laws quite a lot in Ireland over recent years because we want to stay inside the international framework. We're not a tax haven. We don't want to be perceived as a tax haven. So we've got rid of things like stateless corporations. We've got rid of things like the double Irish. You know, we closed a lot of loopholes that existed. We're now increasing our rates. And every time we seem to do it, more money comes in, whereas people expect less money to come in. But someday that will happen.
If you start boasting about that in international meetings, I think everyone's going to start hating you. But so there's been a lot of conversation this week about the US and China, how Europe is able to position itself. Pascal Donahue talked about it last night, the importance of engagement with China. You know, we have seen, not just in the remarks actually, but in the response to President Macron's remarks about China, that these sort of differences in tone and approach among different European countries towards China can really unnerve people. How important is it, do you think, for the Europeans to have a united sort of view on their strategic approach to China?
I think we should have that, actually, and we don't have it to the extent that we should. Something actually raised at a recent European Council meeting that something we haven't really had a long discussion about at European Council among the Prime Ministers is what is our view on this emerging competition between the US and China, and it's something I don't think Europe wants to get stuck in the middle of. I do think President von der Leyen puts it very well in saying that our objective should be not decoupling, but de-risking. So Chinese investment is welcome in Ireland. Trade with China is very important. We don't want to enter into any sort of political conflict with China. They're a competitor, they're also a partner, but we do need to bear in mind that there are potential risks, and that's around certain raw materials. We don't want to be overly dependent on any third country for raw materials that are essential to us, certain products, and also certain security issues.
It's another area, though, where you may end up having kind of unexpected consequences from the fact that the European Union is not a unitary state. You have individual countries reassessing their national security and potentially economic relationships as a result of that. And that's not something that's technically in the purview of Brussels. So do you think there's going to have to be some adaptation around that?
Look, it is difficult to do. We have a common foreign and security policy, but it's done by consensus in reality, not by majority vote or by QMV, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. But when faced with challenges, Europe has come together, I think, better than people thought it would. Has really come together over Ukraine, has really come together when we had to work together on the pandemic, particularly when it came to procuring vaccines and so on. Really worked together when it came to Brexit. People were surprised at the level of solidarity among 27 member states. So I think we can do the same on China.
We seem a really long way away from that.
Doesn't necessarily require a treaty change.
Yeah, we seem quite a long way away from that. Well, you talked about Ukraine. Obviously, it's caused all of Europe to reassess its strategic approach to Russia, but also the way it thinks about its own national security. Your government has started a public consultation around neutrality, which is such a long-standing feature of Irish foreign policy. Is everything on the table in that discussion in terms of the aspects of neutrality?
We're certainly not going to try and confine the conversation or the discussion by saying that anything is ruled in or ruled out. It's certainly not the intention or the plan of this government to apply to join NATO or any military alliance, and that is very clear. There's no party in the Irish Parliament that advocates that. But definitely the invasion of Ukraine has changed things. Ukraine, non-aligned, neutral country, was invaded. Other non-aligned neutral countries like Finland and Sweden have now decided that they're safer in the alliance, that not being in the alliance makes them a softer target and puts them more at risk. Our geography makes that a bit different. We're on the far side of Europe, but there are things we're definitely going to do. We are going to increase our own military spending, our own capacity to defend our skies and seas, and we are going to engage in greater cooperation. So we're part of PESCO, we're part of the European Common Security Policy, we're part of the EU battle groups, for example, and you're going to see more cooperation, I think, at a European level involving Ireland, and as well as that, we are part of NATO's Partnership for Peace, and we'll be renegotiating that partnership arrangement over the next couple of years. And I think that's the space where we're going to be in, being better equipped to defend ourselves, and then secondly, greater cooperation with the European Union in particular.
I mean, opinion in Finland, as you know, did almost a full 180 on NATO membership. You would never have predicted it 2 years ago.
I know.
And now they've gone in with majority support. Actually, opinion here is kind of 50-50.
It's not, no. Like
depends on the poll.
Yeah, there hasn't been that many polls done, but I think it's more. I think support for joining NATO would be more around maybe 20-30%. But again, even in Finland and Sweden, there were always political parties that were well disposed to joining NATO. If there was any party that would be doing that, it would be mine, and we're not. So we're not proposing to join any military alliance. But like I say, very determined that we cooperate more, particularly within the European structure, which is PESCO. And to be honest, that will be a difference between the government parties and the opposition parties, because the opposition parties want to weaken our relationship with Europe and want to take us out of PESCO, out of those security arrangements. And I think when the election does come, European policy for the first time actually will be an issue in Irish politics, because you have the three government parties that are very pro-European, want more integration to a point, and you have a left-led opposition which is more nationalistic and wants to pull out of some European programmes, and that's a decision the Irish people are going to have to make.
But you'll spend more on that security relationship, you think? If what you're talking about in terms of the deepening relationship, there'll be more money.
Yeah, we'll spend more on our own defence forces, and again, money not the problem there. Recruiting and retention, very much a problem.
Are your European allies sort of pushing you in that direction? Do you feel the pressure to be more supportive?
No, not really. Not really. No, I certainly never felt under any pressure in that regard. You know, having attended European Council meetings and Council Ministers meetings on and off, that they understand our position on military neutrality, but they also respect the fact that we're not politically neutral. And you know, if you see how Ireland has contributed to the effort in Ukraine, whether it's accepting 80,000 or more refugees who now live in Ireland, more so per capita than any country in Western Europe, and also we do contribute to the European Peace Facility. So, you know, we're helping to assist the government in Ukraine and in Moldova to push back against what Russia's trying to do to those countries. We don't use the money for lethal weapons, but they can use the money, for example, for fuel, armour, medical equipment, rations, all of those things. So perhaps an Irish solution.
Will you go along to any of these consultations, discussions around?
I might do now. It's going to be led by the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, but I'd certainly be interested in observing them, definitely.
Taoiseach, thank you so much for joining us. I know you've got a very hard stop, so I must get you away, but we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Been a pleasure. Thank you.